Hello there, second graders. Today we are going to read chapter 4 of Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's Magic. Now, this chapter is extremely long, so it's actually going to be broken up into 4 parts, I think. I wrote it down. Yeah, 4 parts. It's a pretty long book, or long chapter. So, this chapter is called The Bad Table Manners Cure. It's probably why it's a long chapter, because that's a pretty important thing. All right, the bad table manners cure. Slop, slurp, gurp, gloop, bang. Christopher Brown was through with his milk. His mother was in the pantry polishing silver, but she didn't want to have to go into the kitchen to see that Christopher was through with his eating. She could tell because the noises had stopped. Mrs. Brown was terribly ashamed of Christopher's table manners, and she talked and talked and talked and talked and talked, but so far it hadn't done a speck of good. Christopher was 10 years old and a very nice little boy in other ways. He had red hair, he was a fine baseball player, he was a good sport, he got excellent grades in school, he kept his room reasonably neat, but he certainly had horrible table manners. No, that isn't right. He had really he really had no table manners at all. He just ate like an animal, a starving wild animal. Mr. and Mrs. Brown had gradually become used to Christopher's table manners. Of course, they made him eat in the kitchen, but what worried Mrs. Brown so terribly was that someday one of Christopher's friends would invite him to dinner. Not just a children's party. Chris had been to lots of those, and he was so much fun and so good at the games that the children didn't care if he ate like a starving animal. No, Mrs. Brown was afraid that he'd be asked to stay all night, or visit in another town, or go to the country with some friends of his families. How dreadful it would be when Christopher took his first bite and began to chew. Christopher chewed with his mouth open so that you could see all the food as he rinsed it around in his mouth. Also, he smacked his lips so loud it sounded like someone slapping their hands on water. He gulped when he swallowed. He washed down food with milk. He made enormous piles of meat, potatoes, peas, carrots, and gravy on his fork, and then thrust the fork so far down his throat you could hardly see the handle. He used his thumb to assemble his big fork loads. He propped his knife and fork against his plate with handles on the table. He buttered whole slices of bread with his hand. He chopped and smashed and mixed his food until the dinner looked like dog food. He picked up his soup bowl and held it under his chin while he slurped his soup. He talked while he was chewing. He gestured with a fork full of food so that bites of food shot around the room like stones from a slingshot. I could go on indefinitely about Christopher's table manners, but I think I've told you enough to show you how that Christopher, sitting beside you at the table, was almost exactly like eating next to a wolf. Watching him eat was certainly not a sight with a wet appetite. Mrs. Brown rubbed polish on the silver and thought about Christopher's table manners and was sad. There should be a school for table manners, she said to herself. An attendant should be necessary. The telephone rang. It was Mrs. Thompson, Dick's mother. She said, I'm having a few of Dick's friends over for dinner a week from Saturday. My brother Charles, the big game hunter, is coming to visit us for a few days, and I thought it would be nice of some of Dick's friends to meet Charles and see his movies of hunting lions and tigers in Africa. I'm just asking Christopher, Hubert Prentice, and Larry Gray, because there will be 12 grown-ups. Mrs. Brown thanked Mrs. Thompson, but said that she knew Christopher would be delighted, and then went out to make herself a big pot of black coffee. Her hands shook when she poured the first cup. 12 grown-ups! And Mrs. Thompson's famous brother, Charles, all sitting at a table with Christopher? Mrs. Brown couldn't bear to think about it. Oh, what will I do? What will I do? She said. She would give Christopher a good talking to, and he would be very nice and pleasant, and agree to everything she said, and really try to have better manners for a meal or two. And then back he'd go, slurp, smack, smack, crunch, choke, gurgle, gulp, bang. Mrs. Brown shuddered. She called her friend, Mrs. Penzel. She said, Mrs. Penzel, I'm not going to beat around the bush. My son Christopher has the worst table manners in the whole wide world, and I don't know how to cure him. Do Percy, Pamela, and Potter have nice table manners? Mrs. Penzel said. Why, I never noticed, Mrs. Brown. You see, Percy, Pamela, and Potter have always been allowed to make their own decisions about everything. As soon as they were born, we gave them free rein, and actually, I haven't seen them eat for several years. Well, what do they live on? Mrs. Brown asked. Oh, they eat, said Mrs. Penzel, but only when they need food for only when the need for food occurs to them. Now, Potter eats nothing but peanut butter and poppy seeds, and he always eats at night. He says that eating during the day is too common in a practice, and should be stopped. Pamela eats nothing but hot dogs and bananas. She does her own shopping and peels the bananas herself, which I think is very progressive for a child of 7 years. I don't, said Mrs. Brown crossly. I think it's dreadful to let a child live on hot dog and bananas. What does Percy eat? Percy. Now let me see, said Mrs. Penzel. Oh, yes, Percy. Why, Percy eats anything. He is most cooperative. Just give him cookies, candy, marshmallows, cake, ice cream, and root beer, and you don't have to worry about Percy. He's a fine boy. Mrs. Brown said, Well, Mrs. Penzel, I guess everyone has their problems. You have cheered me up a lot, but I do hope you know a good doctor. You are going to need one. Mrs. Penzel said, Oh, I think not. Both Mr. Penzel and I were brought up the same way, and we're terribly happy. Mr. Penzel never eats anything but kippered salmon and grape nuts, and I never eat. Mrs. Brown hung up the phone. Kippered salmon and grape nuts? Ugh. She called Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle and told her the whole problem. She didn't leave out a thing when she described the way Christopher ate. And when she was told about the dinner party he had been invited to and how ashamed she was going to be, she got tears in her eyes. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, Now, Mrs. Brown, don't worry. Christopher is such a darling boy, and I know how to cure him. It's going to take cooperation on your part, and it may be a little inconvenient, but I have a cure. I'm going to lend you Lester. Lester? Said Mrs. Brown. Who is he? He is a pig. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, Oh, no, said Mrs. Brown. Not a pig. I have no place to keep a pig, and this is a restricted neighborhood. Just a minute, said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. Lester is absolutely no trouble. He has beautiful manners, is very quiet, and sleeps in the basement. So nobody in the neighborhood will need to know about him. But where shall I put his trough? Asked Mrs. Brown. Okay, that is the end of chapter 4, part 1. I want you to make a prediction, and I'll see you next time.